Hey, I'm Blair Best. It's Monday here on The Story, and tonight, something happened in the state of Washington that hasn't happened in the state's 135-year history. The event had us digging for old. Plus, another pride flag controversy, this time on the House floor in Congress. The back and forth involving Oregon's Maxine Dexter. But first, Portland City Councilor Samir Canal is trying to strengthen Portland's sanctuary city protections. He joins me live in just a few minutes to explain why. It's our big story tonight. Okay, back in 2017, the city of Portland adopted a resolution declaring Portland a sanctuary city, which prohibits the city and its police force from helping with federal immigration enforcement. But the move was simply a resolution. The city's sanctuary status is not binding law. City Councilor Samir Canal is trying to change that and make the sanctuary status part of city code. He represents District 2, which includes North and Northeast Portland neighborhoods like St. John's and Concordia. Now, that ordinance, which could be introduced to full council as soon as next week, would require the city administrator to create new policies to protect and support those in the community who are impacted by ICE deportation efforts. Things like sanctuary city trainings, making sure city services are complying with the sanctuary city status, posting signs in city buildings about entry requirements, and having a person in charge of doing this work in each of the city's more than 24 bureaus. Now, all of that would go along with creating a work group to guide city policy and best practices related to federal immigration enforcement. Councilor Kanal also has plans for a different ordinance that aims to prohibit all law enforcement, including federal agents, from intentionally concealing their identities during routine operations and require officers to display their badges. It's no secret that many immigration enforcement raids are done with agents wearing masks or some kind of face covering. Currently, there is no policy in Portland that prohibits law enforcement from doing that. Okay, joining me now live in studio is Councilor Samir Canal. Councilor, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I think it's safe to say that no matter where you stand politically, everyone has seen or felt some sort of impact from recent immigration enforcement, even if you're just watching it like play out online or on TV. So I'm curious, what have you heard or seen from your seat on council or even from those in your district?
Yeah, I hear about ICE every day. I hear about the risk of immigration raids from people who are at risk or, think that they might be perceived to be. And so it's a common thing. It comes up. It's one of the things I get the most constituent communications about, and we need to be reactive to that. We've also seen some specific raids in Portland. We've seen ICE activity in Portland, and we need to be responsive to that before there's an escalation here.
You say making this change for the city of Portland would, quote, be putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to being a sanctuary city. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so as you said, our sanctuary status is non-binding. At the state level, the Sanctuary Promise Act is binding law. And so taking that and elevating it to the status of law at the city level is really important so that we're not just a sanctuary police bureau, but we're a sanctuary city. Our PPB has directives that ensure that they won't comply and support immigration enforcement. We need to make sure that the rest of the city is prepared to do our part and at city government and make sure that we're prepared for what comes next.
So your proposal would also call on the U.S. Congress to pass legislation to further safeguard civil rights. What exactly do you mean here specifically?
Well, due process. The idea that a person has the right to be, if they're going to be detained, to know who's doing it, why. The idea that a person deserves, if they're being detained, to be held in a humane fashion. There's a lot of different things related to that as well on the masks and identification side too. But yeah, it's about ensuring that we're following our law and our traditions and our Constitution.
Your other idea would, like you mentioned, prohibit officers, both local and federal, from wearing face coverings. Okay, so first, why do you believe that needs to change? And then does the city even have the authority to dictate how federal officers dress?
Yeah, so in terms of why we're doing it, it's because if you're going to be detained, if you're going to have your liberty taken away from you, you deserve to know who's doing it. And one of the ways that we see that play out is with masked federal agents, but there's also the risk of people impersonating a federal agent. We don't want to have that happen here, where someone can commit a crime and just not be interacted with because they claim to be ICE. That's a really big risk that we've seen in other cities. And so we want to make sure that we're responsive to that. As for the rest, the federal government can choose to ignore state law. They can choose to ignore local law. That doesn't mean that we should just give up and stop doing our jobs to create law. And Portlanders have been asking, as I mentioned, they're seeing what California has done. They're seeing what's happened in Chicago and LA and all these other places and saying, when is my city going to step up and stand for me? And it's time that Portland does that. And this is a small piece of how we're going to do that.
You think Portland can be doing more?
Absolutely. And so a lot of colleagues are working on this. This is the first of a few different things. I know Councilor Avalos is working on a citywide preparedness plan so that people are ready, including our staff and contractors, in case ICE shows up. I know Councilor Murillo is working on policies on data privacy, on detention centers and their impact on our community, and on private security usage by the federal government too. There's a lot of work being done and a lot of councilors stepping up and working on it.
So we know there have been nightly protests outside the ICE office in South Portland, impacting many residents there. A nearby school even relocated this summer to get away from all the noise and chaos. Since June, at least 26 protesters have been charged with federal offenses tied to that ICE office. That's according to the Associated Press. And President Trump recently got wind of these ongoing protests, and he said he is now considering sending National Guard troops here. He said Portland is, quote, like living in hell. What do you make of that comment, and what message do you have for the president?
I have a great time living in Portland. I've lived other places. I left for 14 years and I wanted to come back pretty much every day. And it's a great place to live. We don't need federal assistance in following the law here or in supporting a safe community. We're seeing a lot of reports come out. We just had a report showing that downtown traffic is up for the highest level since before the pandemic. So we're seeing a lot of really positive news here. If people want to say something else to advance a political cause, they can do that. But we're able to handle our own business here.
Okay, Councilor Canal, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, now it's your turn. What do you think about Councilor Canal's proposals? Do you support them? Why or why not? Share your thoughts with us. Email the story at kgw.com or call and leave us a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Well, coming up next on the story, Governor Tina Kotek celebrated some new consumer laws in Oregon regarding medical debt and hidden online fees. What they mean for you, coming up. Plus, we head to Washington, D.C., where a spat over a pride flag spilled out on the floor of the House of Representatives, involving Oregon Representative Maxine Dexter. Details when the story returns. Today, Oregon Governor Tina Kotek signed a trio of bills that she says are aimed at protecting consumers. Senate Bill 605 means that medical debt will no longer be reported to credit agencies or show up on your credit report. It also goes a step further and removes existing medical debt from your credit report. It was a rule that once existed at the federal level under the Biden administration, but earlier this year, a federal judge ruled against it. So Kotek says it was important for Oregon to make its own law, saying that people shouldn't be penalized for health emergencies outside of their control.
People shouldn't have to worry about a medical crisis affecting their credit scores and their credit reports. And with this bill, medical debt will no longer haunt Oregonians on their credit reports, on their credit history, and that is a huge win for Oregonians.
She also signed a bill aimed at hidden online fees. Under Senate Bill 430, companies must include all required fees in advertised prices, meaning you know exactly how much you have to pay before completing a purchase. And the last bill has to do with buying a car. Under House Bill 3178, car dealerships have to finalize your car loan within 10 days or void the purchase.
Some dealers will keep people hanging on for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks until they get their financing done. That is very disruptive and very hard on our families who are trying to get things done. This bill now will say, this new law says that there's a time limit when it comes to the financing deal that you're working out, and then you got to give people a chance to walk away if it's not the right one and be clear about if it's a good deal for them.
Okay, I can hear some of you shouting at the TV now. You're thinking, how can Kotek brag about protecting consumers when she's pushing for a transportation bill that would raise the gas tax and registration fees? Well, here's what she said today about that.
It's important to bring up there are so many costs that Oregonians are dealing with. Let's talk about transportation. It is really important to make sure for folks who need to get to work and need to live their daily lives that the roads are dependable and safe. The transportation discussion is about making sure our roads are maintained, that they are open no matter what the weather is like, and that they are maintained so people can get to work. It is a safety issue.
Kotek says she thinks the transportation bill will pass when senators continue the special session on Wednesday. To D.C. now, where in Congress, the House passed its version of the National Defense Authorization Act, basically the budget for the Department of Defense and national security. But not before some pushback from one of Oregon's newest representatives. Maxine Dexter, a Democrat who represents East Portland out to Hood River, spoke out against an amendment in the bill that would ban pride flags in common areas and offices across Department of Defense facilities. Here she is on the floor last week.
I rise in opposition to this cruel and callous amendment. There are 20 days until the government shuts down, 8 legislative days. And what are Republicans focused on? Flags, pride flags.
But as she went on, she was interrupted by Republicans Corey Mills of Florida and Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, upset that Dexter brought a pride flag with her.
Republicans are spending valuable floor time that could be used by the government to lower costs for working families.
The gentlelady will suspend. Does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition for what purpose?
To identify the fact that that flag violates our House rules by flying any other flag but the American flag.
Okay, the Republicans claimed Representative Dexter violated House rules, which she disagreed with.
She has to take it down.
The chair will remind members his announced policy prohibits flag waving on the floor.
I am not waving it, Mr.
The
Speaker.
gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you. We are
Mr. Speaker,
we are
simply not
spending
waving a flag
valuable
but presenting it.
time that
The gentlelady is recognized.
could be used to fund the government or lower costs for working families. Trying to ban the display of pride flags in any workplace or common area at the Department of Defense.
Ultimately, Congresswoman Dexter was allowed to finish her remarks with the pride flag at the podium.
This obsession with attacking, dehumanizing, and villainizing our LGBTQIA+ community is as sick as it is a waste of time. Trump is using the same tired playbook authoritarian regimes have used throughout history.
Now, as for the bill, it's through the House, and the Senate Armed Services Committee approved its version earlier this summer. Now, the two chambers have to bring their versions together before sending it to the president. So it's unclear whether the amendment banning pride flags at DoD facilities will end up in the final version. But we'll keep you posted. Well, a company that's faced heavy pushback from some in the Portland area over environmental concerns is helping one airline at PDX go green. So how exactly does that work? Joe Ranieri explains.
90% of the state of Oregon's jet fuel is stored in tanks like these along Highway 30 in Northwest Portland. Well, 2 of these tanks are going green. Zenith Energy is hoping the Portland terminal is going to be filled with renewable energy.
This is the first of its kind, and we think it's pretty special.
And they already have plenty of room to fit sustainable aviation fuel.
So this is an 80,000 barrel tank.
And you have 2 of them, so you have 160,000.
That's right.
JT Hendricks is the terminal manager for Zenith Energy and says there's 2 parts to the fuel.
You have your conventional jet, which is 50% of the blend, and the renewable feedstock, which is the blending component that we blend those 2 together, and that's how you get your finished SAF.
PDX just got its first shipment of sustainable aviation fuel earlier this month. Port of Portland Chief Aviation Officer Dan Pippinger told us in a statement, "We're excited about this step toward bringing sustainable aviation fuel to PDX. It's a move that can help improve local air quality and cut down on greenhouse gas emissions, which is great news for our communities." Delta Airlines was the first commercial airline to use this type of fuel at PDX.
We are very committed to sustainable aviation fuel.
But the cost to keep jets in the air isn't cheap.
Unfortunately, sustainable aviation fuel is still a very nascent technology, and there's a couple of different ways of making it, but they're all very nascent and all very expensive.
Charlotte Lawler with Delta Airlines says they are working with different suppliers to keep the cost down.
Today, it's still 2, sometimes 3 times more expensive than conventional jet fuel. And so our ambition is to try to work across the value chain, including with the ports, the producers, the blenders, to try to bring the cost as low as possible.
Well, it's not cheap to fly.
We don't want to make it something prohibitive. And so what we're really focused on right now is working with different partners across the value chain.
Lawler and Delta Airlines are doing all they can to drive down the cost, at the same time moving toward a greener way to take to the sky. For Environment Northwest, Joe Ranieri, KGW News.
Okay, it's worth noting that Zenith Energy has long faced intense opposition from environmental groups who argue that the facility that stores fuel along the Willamette is unsafe. They fear the fuel could spill into the river and create a catastrophic disaster when the next major earthquake strikes. Tonight, a spokesperson for the group 350 PDX, which opposes Zenith Energy, told KGW in part, "The real problem here is that so-called renewable fuels and biofuels are a false climate solution. Zenith's operations already pose a significant and intolerable risk to humans, the environment, and tribal treaties. By adding substantial aviation fuel to their portfolio, they are supercharging that risk. When you add the word sustainable or renewable, it sounds better, but it's greenwashing at best." Okay, turning now to a look at the weather. It is the last week of summer, and Chief Meteorologist Matt Safino is here with a look at what to expect, including, Matt, I hear there's a brief warm-up on the way.
Yeah, Blair, there is for tomorrow, and really this last week of summer is going to be pretty spectacular around the Northwest. As Mount Hood is right now, as viewed from our camera in Vancouver at the Springs at the waterfront, we installed this camera a couple weeks ago, and really today is the first day we've had a really clear view of Mount Hood. The last couple of weeks we've had a lot of haze, wildfire smoke, then of course the rain yesterday, but today beautiful, even though there's not a lot of snow on it. Wait for it, a few weeks or so, and I'm sure we'll begin to see some white up there. 76 degrees in Vancouver and Portland right now, which is right about average for this time of the year. That's our high, or the average is 77, so we were right there. 80s were scattered. We had 81 in the Dalles, 85 in Medford for Oregon's hotspot, and 82 down in Brookings. With that 82 in Brookings, often an indication that the rest of Western Oregon is about to warm up. So while we're headed for the upper 80s, let's talk about 90-degree days. The average number of 90-degree days in Portland in a year is 15. This year, we made it up to 19. So above average by a bit. The average date of our last 90-degree day is September 6th. And we got a shot at it tomorrow, which would make it 10 days later. But keep in mind, this is an average. So if we do make 90 tomorrow, it's not all that out of the pocket that we would do it. So again, it's been a warm summer, but not as warm as it could have been. This is the first year in 5 years that we had fewer than 20 90-degree days. And several of the last years, we've had 24, 27, 28 90-degree days. So, by that metric, we had a pretty cool summer. I wouldn't call it cool, but it wasn't too extremely hot for too long. Now, we've had 71 80-degree days, well above the average. And of course, the last couple weeks of August and early September, a lot of people complained about the humidity. It was a little more humid than normal, but that is now a thing of the past. In case you're wondering about our hottest day this year, it was 102 back on the 22nd of August. We only had 2 100-degree days this year. We had 3 more days where we hit 99, so we got close. But again, all things considered, Blair, it wasn't that hot of a summer when you look at some of the metrics that I'm showing you here. So let's look at the almanac for today. Again, the high was 76 now. That'll be updated later, right about average. But the records are all still in the 90s. And tomorrow's record is 92. We'll be close. I don't think we get there, but I think somebody in the Willamette Valley will hit 90 tomorrow. I'll have to wait and see who that is. Now, the rainfall for the month. Most of that, all but 400s of it, as a matter of fact, came yesterday. That was a good soaker on Sunday. And so we're close to average for our rainfall. Well, actually a little bit above average for the month to date. And since the water year began way back on October 1st of last year, we're about 1 1/3 inches below average. We have a little bit of time to catch it up the rest of the month, the next 15 days or so. So all in all, been a pretty good summer. And as I said, the forecast going forward for the rest of summer, which is our 7-day forecast, looks great. We're hot tomorrow at 88, but then right around 80 Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. There's a slight chance of rain over the weekend, Saturday night or Sunday, but I'm not too impressed with the odds of that. And if we get any, it won't be much. And still around 80 as fall begins next Monday, Blair.
Okay, I love it. I love all that sunshine.
Yeah, it's looking good, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Thanks so much, Matt. Well, coming up next on the story, we're digging for old as the Washington State Constitution made a journey today that's never been done before in the Evergreen State. That's next when the story returns. Well, it has been a while since we've gone digging for old here on this story. And while we usually feature items or events from Oregon with the help from the Historical Society, tonight we're looking north and east into the state of Washington. Accompanied by state police, Washington's original 1889 Constitution left its climate-controlled vault in Olympia and was on display at the Spokane Public Library for a couple of hours this afternoon. It is the first time ever that the historic document has traveled to eastern Washington. It's had 135 plus years to do it, but today was the day. The Constitution allowed Washington to become the nation's 42nd state. But let's take you through a little history. In early 1889, Congress passed the Enabling Act, which allowed Washington, Montana, and 2 Dakota territories, north and south, to be admitted into the Union. Among other requirements, Congress told each prospective state to write and ratify a state constitution. So an election was held in Washington to choose 75 delegates to frame the document that would form the basis for all future laws. They met on July 4th, 1889 in Olympia and worked for a month and a half before finishing in late August. The last governor of the Washington Territory, Miles Moore, called for an election on October 1st of 1889 to ratify the newly written Constitution. It easily passed with more than 40,000 yes votes and just under 12,000 no votes. And now that conditions under the Enabling Act were met, a certified copy of the document was sent by courier to President Benjamin Harrison, whose approval was necessary before Washington could officially become a state. But several days went by without a response. Finally, a message arrived on November 4th, but it was not the news Washington Territory leaders expected. Turns out Governor Miles Moore forgot to sign the Constitution before it was sent to D.C. And without that signature, the president could not approve it. Well, that night, a new copy of the Constitution was made, written out word for word since no copy machines were available, obviously, signed by Governor Moore and sent to the president the next day. And then, just under a week later, on November 11th, 1889, this telegram arrived in Olympia, addressed to the Executive Mansion. It reads, "The President signed the proclamation declaring Washington to be a state in the Union at 5 o'clock and 27 minutes this afternoon." And just like that, Washington became the 42nd state. Well, the more you know, folks. That's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. Straight Talk is coming your way next. And don't forget, everyone has a story to tell. Have a great Monday night. I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.